very, very early on the Wednesday morning between the death and the funeral. And I just sat down and wrote it, and it took about an hour and a half and just came pouring out, really. Actually, it's interesting. Sounds rather sort of bizarre, but I did go to Diana's coffin the day after I'd written it, and I read it to her in there, and I did sort of feel a sort of positive energy come through that somehow she approved of what I was going to say.
The evening before what would become the most watched funeral of the 20th century, Charles Spencer slipped away by himself, walked to his sister's coffin, unfolded a set of pages he had finished writing only hours before, and read the whole thing out loud to her. No cameras, no congregation, no audience of any kind. Just Diana. He has said so himself, that in the quiet after finishing the eulogy, he took it to her and spoke every line into the silence. Sit with that picture for a moment. A brother, alone, delivering the most dangerous speech in modern royal memory to the one person in the world who could not answer him. Because almost 30 years on, that same man reportedly glanced down at a slick documentary proposal stamped with the names Netflix, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle, and reduced the whole thing to 4 syllables. Is this a joke? 4 words. That was the entire response. And tonight, I'm going to walk you through why those 4 words may end up hurting the Sussex brand more deeply than anything King Charles or Prince William has ever done in public. Here is my promise, and you know I don't break them. Before the end of this video, you will have 3 answers. First, what was actually written inside that pitch? The exact ask that made Diana's brother recoil in his chair. Because when you hear what they wanted, the diaries, the home movies, the estate itself, his fury is going to make complete sense to you. Second, the private wound that explains this man. A guilt Charles Spencer has reportedly carried since the mid-90s, the injury that turned him into the most unmovable gatekeeper in Britain, and the reason this particular proposal felt to him like history sliding into the same groove twice. And third, the quiet letter he is said to have sent afterward, not to Harry, not to Meghan, but to Prince William. A letter royal insiders describe not as sentiment, but as strategy, one that may quietly redraw every battle line in this family war. 3 threads. I will tie off every single one before we finish, in that order. That is the deal between you and me. But none of it makes any sense until you understand who Charles Spencer actually is, because he has stood so far back from the spotlight for so long that most of the public has genuinely forgotten how large a figure he is. He is 62 years old, the youngest brother of the late Diana, Princess of Wales, and the 9th Earl Spencer, the head of a family whose name and land have held together for 500 years. If you remember him at all, you probably remember him from a single afternoon in September of 1997, standing inside Westminster Abbey in front of an audience of roughly 2 billion people, delivering a eulogy that broke every rule ever written about how royal occasions are supposed to sound. He looked the institution in the face, with the king's mother and 2 future kings seated within arm's reach, and he made them a promise on behalf of what he called Diana's blood family. That her sons would be raised with warmth, with imagination, with breathing room, that they would not be shrunk down by cold royal formality, that he and the Spencers would shield William and Harry from the same relentless pursuit that had chased his sister into a Paris tunnel. People still remember the applause rolling in from the streets outside the Abbey like an incoming tide. What they forget is that the speech was never really a eulogy. It was a vow. And Charles Spencer has spent every year since then keeping it, quietly, unflinchingly, and almost invisibly. Start with the burial, because this is the opening move on the board and almost nobody reads it correctly. The world assumed Diana would be laid to rest inside a royal vault, under royal terms, on ground the palace controlled. That is not what happened. Diana was buried at Althorp, the Spencer estate in Northamptonshire, in the house where she grew up, where she rode her horses, where she became the young woman the world eventually fell for. On land her family has owned for 5 centuries. Peel away the soft language and say the hard thing. Her brother refused to let the institution keep her even in death. The royal family got the funeral. The Spencers kept Diana. And from that afternoon forward, anyone who wanted access to the real, private Diana, the letters, the reels of family film, the childhood rooms, had to go through one man. A man who had already told 2 billion people exactly what he thought of the institution that would come knocking. So that is your gatekeeper. And before we go any further, do this small mental exercise with me because it will sharpen everything that follows. Picture Diana's legacy as a great museum. The public owns the postcards, the gowns, the front pages, the iconic photographs, the endlessly recycled clips. Anyone can print those, and God knows everyone has. But the originals, the handwritten pages, the raw, unedited film, the bedroom she actually slept in, the ground where she actually lies, all of that sits inside a single private collection, controlled by a single curator, and he decides what gets loaned out and what stays in the dark. Every Diana documentary you have ever seen was assembled from postcards. Not once has the curator loaned an original. Now ask yourself, what would it take to persuade him to open that collection for the first time in his life? How much trust? What purity of motive? What guarantee that his sister's memory would be honored, not spent? Hold your answer in your head. Then watch who came knocking and what they came asking for, and decide for yourself whether they were ever going to get through that door. Now watch what came rolling up the drive. It started the way these things always start, with something small, something shiny, something that looked completely innocent. Jewelry. At the evening reception of the royal wedding in 2018, Meghan Markle appeared wearing Diana's aquamarine ring, that big, pale blue stone the world recognized on sight. And honestly, in that first moment, from where Charles Spencer was sitting, it probably felt rather touching. A new woman, someone his nephew adored, choosing to carry a piece of Diana into her wedding night. It looked like remembrance. It might even have looked like family. Then the butterfly earrings appeared. Then the Cartier tank watch. Then the gold bracelets. Piece by piece, appearance by appearance, one Diana item after another surfaced on Meghan, and always at the events where photographers were not merely likely to be waiting, they were guaranteed. Let me be fair, because fairness matters on this channel. Nobody can prove the intentions were anything but genuine, and grief moves through families in strange, tender ways. But patterns are patterns, and the public spotted this one very quickly. Somehow, every headline Meghan moment arrived with a piece of Diana attached, like a hallmark pressed into the metal of the day. Once as a tribute, twice as a habit. Every single time is a strategy, and you don't need a palace source to see that. All you need is eyes. Hold on to that word, strategy, because the jewelry was only the overture, and what came next is where the warm feeling in one brother's chest reportedly began to cool into something harder. March 2021. The Oprah interview. You remember it. The whole planet remembers it. But I want you to remember it the way Charles Spencer reportedly watched it, alone, from Althorp. Critics pulled that broadcast apart frame by frame afterward, and what they found was not accidental staging. The lighting was low and golden. The setting was soft, close, confessional. The subject was a young woman silenced by an institution that would not take her mental health seriously. Her pleas for help brushed aside. Isolated inside a hostile machine with no door left open except the one that led to the public. Any serious royal watcher felt the shiver of recognition almost immediately, because that was, beat for beat, the architecture of Diana's 1995 Panorama interview. The broadcast Diana gave because the palace had closed every other exit on her. The camera angles rhymed, the grammar of victimhood rhymed, the casting rhymed. One isolated woman, one sympathetic interviewer, one faceless institution. Watching from the house where his sister grew up, Charles Spencer reportedly did not experience that hour as a tribute. And frankly, knowing what you are about to learn in a few minutes about his own history with Panorama, how could he? Run the comparison yourself, side by side, element by element. 1995, a royal wife alone, speaking about an institution deaf to her suffering. 2021, a royal wife alone, speaking about an institution deaf to her suffering. 1995, the palace has bolted every door, so she goes over its head, straight to the public, through a single trusted interviewer. 2021, identical. 1995, hushed light, a confessional stillness. the atmosphere of secrets finally escaping the walls. 2021, identical. The one element that had shifted is the one that tells you everything. Diana gave her interview while still trapped inside the system, with everything to lose and no way out in sight. The 2021 version was filmed from a California villa, after the exit, with a full production apparatus attached. The original was a cry for help. The remake, whatever else you think of it, was a launch. Then the Netflix productions arrived. The documentary series, the direct-to-camera confessionals, and with them a story built for global export. A couple driven out and pursued across continents by the exact same establishment and the same press pack that had destroyed Diana. The implication was never remotely subtle. It said what happened to her is happening again. Same machine, next generation, and this time the heroine escaped. As a piece of storytelling, I will grant you it is compelling. As a business plan, it is brilliant. But for the man who watched his sister's genuine agony be harvested in real time by media people who never cared whether she made it out, this was starting to look sickeningly familiar. The earrings had felt like remembrance. This felt like repetition. And somewhere in those years, I suspect, the warm feeling died completely. Let me give you my frame for what was really going on, because I approach this from an angle most royal commentary refuses to touch. Think of it as brand licensing. Take the emotion out and just look at the assets. After Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal duty and gave up the use of their HRH styles, they had to live on something. What they held was fame with a sell-by date and one asset more bankable than every other combined: Diana. Her face, her mythology, her martyrdom. In business terms, the Sussexes had been trading on a brand they were using without a license, because the actual licensor, the man who owned the archive, the estate, and the originals, was a 62-year-old aristocrat in Northamptonshire whom no one had bothered to consult. Every ring worn, every panorama echo, every hunted like Diana framing was another unauthorized withdrawal from the Diana account. And here's the interesting thing about unauthorized withdrawals. They work beautifully, right up until the morning you need the bank manager to approve a loan. Remember that. We are getting there. Because in early 2026, the Sussex operation walked into a wall. The Spotify arrangement had already died. The lifestyle venture launched under the name American Riviera Orchard was not landing the way they had planned. The whole California project needed something enormous, something big enough to justify the Netflix relationship and remind the world, loudly, why Harry and Meghan still mattered. And then, somewhere inside a development meeting, someone put the idea on the table. A grand anniversary documentary for 2027. Diana, 30 years after the Paris tunnel. 30 years of grief. 30 years of unanswered questions. An emotional, cinematic, definitive Diana film fronted by her own son. On paper, it made complete sense. Netflix, according to reports, adored it instantly and stood ready to pour resources into it. But there was one angle inside the pitch that made it truly irresistible to the people selling it, and this is the angle I want you to sit with. They reportedly wanted to draw a straight, explicit line between Diana's war against the establishment and Meghan's war against the same forces. They wanted to position Meghan Markle as the modern continuation of Diana's story. The 21st century version of the woman who refused to be silenced. Diana's halo, formally handed over. Bold, wildly ambitious, and carrying one catastrophic, structural, unfixable flaw. They needed Charles Spencer to make it happen, because here is what the project reportedly required. And listen closely, because this list is the answer to the first thread I opened at the top of this video. They wanted Althorp itself as the backdrop, the childhood home, the lake, the island where she lies. They wanted the private family archives. They reportedly wanted access to Diana's personal handwritten diaries. They wanted home movies never before released, the unguarded footage, the real private Diana that nobody outside the Spencer family has ever laid hands on. Without those elements, this would be just another history documentary stitched together from the same recycled news clips as every other one. With them, it would be the defining Diana film of the century, and there is exactly one living person who controls every single item on that list. So Netflix and the Sussex team brought the proposal to Charles Spencer, and by every indication, they genuinely believed he would agree on the spot. You can see their logic. From the outside, it looks like an enormous cinematic tribute, a love letter with a streaming budget behind it. Exactly the sort of thing a devoted brother, guardian of his sister's memory, ought to embrace. But that is not what Charles Spencer saw when he read the pages. He saw the part Meghan was scripted to play. He saw where the halo was being moved. And the second he understood the architecture of the thing, who it truly served, what it truly sold, he answered with the line that has now passed into royal legend. Is this a joke? When this particular man calls your project a joke, the word carries 3 decades of weight behind it. Very few people alive hold more moral authority over Diana's legacy than the brother who has been defending it since the day they carried her coffin to the island. And just like that, the people who had built an entire documentary around Diana's legacy discovered they had no Diana to build it around. No house, no diaries, no film reels, no license. Now for the second thread, the one I have been holding back. Because this is the part of the story that turns Charles Spencer from a stubborn aristocrat into something far more human and far more immovable. Why is this man so absolute? Why does the archive stay shut against every offer, every budget, every nephew? The answer, according to long-standing accounts, is guilt. A very specific guilt that has reportedly shaped everything he has done since 1997. The story runs like this. It was reportedly Charles Spencer himself who first put his sister in touch with the journalist behind the Panorama interview, Martin Bashir. The same interview the world now knows was secured using forged documents and calculated psychological manipulation. Picture the mechanics of it. Diana in the mid-90s was isolated, afraid, and in real pain. And someone walked in carrying fabricated paperwork engineered to convince her that the people closest to her were betraying her, that she could not trust anyone, that her only safe move was to sit down in front of a camera and bleed on national television. Her vulnerability was not incidental to that broadcast. Her vulnerability was the product. And her younger brother, by these accounts, had unknowingly held the door open. When the full truth about how that interview was engineered finally surfaced years later, it reportedly landed on Charles Spencer like a landslide, because it meant he had played a part, however innocent, however unintended, in one of the most profound exploitations of his sister's suffering during her lifetime. Think about what that does to a person. You spend your whole life believing you are your sister's protector, and then you find out that the single most damaging media event of her life walked in through an introduction you made. Every year since, by every account, has been an act of atonement. The sealed diaries, the unreleased home movies, the refusals, decade after decade, to let anyone monetize the island or the archive. He has been making certain, with the single-mindedness of a man doing penance, that nothing resembling Panorama can ever happen to Diana again, not even in death. And in doing so, he has quietly achieved something extraordinary, something almost no famous figure of the modern era has been granted. He has protected Diana's mystery. There is a private Diana the world has never consumed, and she exists only because one man keeps saying no. So now run the tape again, but this time sit in his chair. You are Charles Spencer. You have spent nearly 30 years atoning for one introduction. You have turned down every network, every publisher, every offer, because you saw exactly what happened the one time you left the gate ajar. And now a courier hands you a proposal that wants the diaries your sister wrote in her own hand, the home movies of her running across the lawns of Althorp as a girl, the island where you buried her, all of it. In service of a story that does not end with Diana, but with Meghan Markle wearing her halo. You know the financial pressure behind the pitch. You know their debut documentary about royal wounds was the platform's biggest ever opening, so you can calculate to the decimal point exactly what your sister's private pain is worth to these people. What do you say? Honestly, what would any brother say? A proposal lands on the desk. Soft lighting and confessional framing. The Panorama playbook rebuilt inside Oprah's villa. A narrative that mines his sister's pain to crown a successor. A request for the diaries, the home movies, the most intimate remains of the most exploited woman of her era, being fed into a streaming platform's content pipeline at a moment when, as we are about to see, the people pitching the whole thing were financially desperate. Of course he said what he said. Honestly, the only surprise is that he stopped at 4 words. Now, the desperation. Because to understand why this documentary mattered so intensely to Montecito, you have to look at the state of the Sussex media empire in early 2026. And I warn you now, it is not a flattering portrait. Everyone knows about the $100 million Netflix deal, the 5-year arrangement that funded the California dream, and everyone now knows it has been hanging by a thread. The flagship project meant to stabilize the operation was the lifestyle series With Love, Meghan. Instead, it became the iceberg. Within 24 hours of the show going live on Netflix, the verdicts came in fast, thick, and brutal. Let me walk you through the scoreboard, because the scoreboard is the story here. The Evening Standard in London handed it 4 stars and still could not resist mocking it on the way out the door. The Times gave it 2 stars and described it, in a phrase I honestly cherish, as surreally dull. The Daily Telegraph also landed on 2 stars and called the program an exercise in narcissism packed with lavish brunches, celebrity friends, and business plugs. And then there is The Guardian, and pay close attention to this one, because The Guardian is no royalist rag. This is a paper that has long argued for abolishing the monarchy outright and has repeatedly published pieces defending the treatment of Meghan. If anyone in British print was primed to embrace this show, it was them. They gave it 1 star and described it as toe-curlingly unlovable television. One of their writers went further and suggested it might be the last thing Meghan ever makes for Netflix. Even the television editor at Hello, the gentlest publication in the kingdom, confessed she genuinely could not figure out who the show was for. When the spectrum of British media stretches from Republican broadsheet to Royal Fan Weekly, and they all land on the same wince, that is not a review problem. That is a product problem. And here is the part of the review story that most coverage skated straight past, the detail I find genuinely fascinating. The harshest verdict did not come from the so-called royalist press at all. It came from The Guardian, the paper most ideologically sympathetic to Meghan's grievances against the institution, the paper that wants the whole monarchy abolished. Think about what that actually means. Her natural allies, the people wired to cheer anything that diminishes the crown, sat through her show and reached for 1 star. When your opponents pan you, that is Tuesday. When your friends pan you, that is a verdict. And the pattern underneath is worse than any single review. The couple's debut documentary series, Harry and Meghan, the one where they laid out their struggles inside royal life, remains the platform's most watched debut in history. That single fact is the skeleton key to the entire saga, so hold on to it. Their other projects, Heart of Invictus and Polo, met a frosty reception. With Love, Meghan, sold as a fresh, approachable window into their California life, resonated even less. Line those facts up side by side, and the audience's message could not be louder if it were written in the sky by an airplane. The world is not interested in Meghan's brunches. The world is interested in royal wounds. The only Sussex product that has ever truly sold is proximity to the crown and to Diana. Which is precisely why, when the brunch economy collapsed, the pitch deck reached for the deepest royal wound available. According to Fox News, industry experts noted the 5-year, $100 million arrangement was set to expire in 2025. A second season of With Love, Meghan has already been shot and is scheduled to premiere this autumn. But beyond that, the fog rolls in. Following the lukewarm response, the streaming giant has reportedly decided against renewing the deal, much to Meghan's dismay. Although other reports insist she remains in negotiations for some kind of renewal. So let us be precise and say the marriage between Montecito and Netflix is, at best, on life support. The royal commentator Ian Pelham Turner said it plainly. Losing Netflix would be a major blow for the couple. And according to media watchers, she desperately needs to get back on her feet or surrender the only realistic hope she has of remaining in the spotlight. Picture the situation from inside the Montecito office for a second, because the stakes here are brutally simple. A second season, already filmed, already paid for, sails toward an autumn premiere, while the deal that commissioned it lies expiring on the table. Every review of Season 1 becomes evidence in the renewal file. Every cultural shrug gets counted. If Season 2 lands where Season 1 did, there is no Season 3, no pipeline, no platform, and the entire California project loses the engine that funds it. That is the cliff edge the Diana documentary pitch was standing on. It was never one project among many. It was the project, the single card in the deck guaranteed to draw a global audience because it was the one card printed with the only royal story bigger than their own exit. And the man at Althorp tore it up with 4 words. Put all of that together, and the 2027 Diana documentary stops looking like a passion project and starts looking like exactly what I believe it was, a rescue flare. The question now is whether the Sussexes can find a way around the rejection, and that question leads us somewhere genuinely unexpected. Because here is the third thread, the letter. And this is where the story stops being about a documentary and becomes about the future of the monarchy itself. Charles Spencer, by all accounts, did not make this decision in a vacuum, and sources close to the palace have been quietly describing a relationship that most royal watchers have completely slept on. The understanding between Diana's brother and Diana's eldest son. It is no secret that Prince William has been privately furious for years about the commercialization of his mother's image. But understand the cage William sits inside. He is the future king, which means every action he takes detonates consequences. He cannot publicly block his own brother's media projects without manufacturing a global headline about palace censorship and royal family warfare. And whenever the palace blocks something, it always reads as the establishment protecting itself. But when Diana's own brother, the man who stood in Westminster Abbey and swore before 2 billion people to protect her sons, calls a project a joke, that is not institutional control. That is family honor. Nobody can spin it because there is no institution to blame. Do you see the elegance of it? The one man free to say no is the one man whose no cannot be weaponized. William never had to lift a finger, and I would gently suggest that this is not so much a coincidence as an alignment. 2 guardians of the same memory arriving at the same wall from different directions. There is a name for this in international affairs, and the parallel is worth 30 seconds of your time. When 2 governments cannot speak without losing face, the message travels through a back channel. A private citizen, an elder statesman, someone with standing on both sides and a uniform on neither. The envoy can say the unsayable, precisely because he holds no office. And if the message lands badly, no government falls. That is exactly the role Charles Spencer now occupies inside this family war. He has standing with the public, blood ties to both princes, moral title over Diana's memory, and no constitutional position whatsoever. The palace cannot tell Netflix no without a scandal. William cannot tell Harry no without a headline. But the Earl in Northamptonshire can tell everyone no in 4 words over breakfast. And the only institution that absorbs the blow is Montecito. Once you see him as the back channel, the next development stops being surprising and starts feeling inevitable. And then reportedly came the move nobody saw coming. In a discreet but remarkable step, Charles Spencer is said to have written to Prince William, urging him to publicly address the deepening crisis between Prince Harry and the royal family. And before anyone mistakes this for peacemaking, let me kill that idea now. According to insiders, this plea is not about emotional reconciliation. It is about strategy, stability, and protecting the global standing of the British monarchy. The reported contents are brutal in their clarity. The silence cannot go on. The crown has to reclaim its strength. Harry, in the eyes of the world's media, has become a symbol of weakness, no longer seen as the man he was raised to be, the soldier, the prince, the statesman, but as a shadow of himself, emotionally fragile, reactive, and consumed by the story of his wife. Spencer reportedly warned that Harry's choices have allowed the press to redefine him, not as a royal, but as an outsider, being led rather than leading, and that in the eyes of many royalists and many global outlets, that perception has hardened into something permanent. Most striking of all, he is said to have cautioned that by ignoring Harry completely, treating him with total indifference, the royal family is handing Harry and Meghan an open microphone, letting them dominate the global conversation unchecked, while traditional royal values are mocked and dismantled in real time. Read that again. Diana's brother, the man who once stood at her funeral and stared down the Windsors to their faces, is now reportedly urging the future king to defend the crown's image. If you ever wanted a single sentence to measure how completely Harry and Meghan have rearranged the loyalties of this family, there it is. So whose side is the public on? Because a fight like this never stays inside the family. And right now, there is a genuine global debate raging across social media, television panels, and international front pages. And it has split opinion in a way that is anything but even. On one side stand those who back Prince William and, by extension, Charles Spencer. For them, refusing the Netflix documentary is a matter of respect and plain honor. Diana's story, they argue, has been told and retold, and converting her memory into yet another entertainment product risks trivializing the emotional weight of her death. The 30th anniversary, in this view, should be a moment of private family reflection, not a marketing window with a premiere date. On the other side, Harry's defenders gather, and in fairness, their argument deserves a proper hearing too. Diana shaped both of her sons equally, they say, and Harry has every right to tell his own mother's story. His perspective on grief, on media intrusion, on growing up inside that hurricane, offers a dimension of the historical record that nobody else alive can supply. And the sober truth, as ever, sits somewhere messier than either camp will admit. Projects like this are assembled by small armies of producers, historians, writers, and executives, and decisions about streaming content are rarely the whim of any single individual. But before you pick your side, try standing in both pairs of shoes. Imagine you are William, and the most painful event of your childhood is being scheduled as a content drop with a marketing plan by your own brother's production partners. Now imagine you are Harry, and you are told that the story of your own mother, the woman whose hand you held through hospital wards and homeless shelters, is somehow not yours to tell. Both of those positions hurt. Both are human. That is what makes this saga so unbearable to watch. There is no villain in that particular frame, only two sons and one grave. The villainy, if you want to find any, lives in the commercial machinery wrapped around the grief, and in the world of celebrity and royalty, perception weighs as much as fact, where every leak and rumor instantly becomes another chapter in the saga of two warring brothers. And here is why the temperature runs so hot, why this is not just another content dispute. Remember who we are actually talking about. Long before her sons became headlines, Diana had already made herself one of the most consequential figures the modern monarchy has ever produced, not through palaces, but through defiance. In the late 80s and early 90s, when fear and misinformation around HIV and AIDS were everywhere, when patients were stigmatized, abandoned, treated as outcasts, Diana walked into the wards and took their hands. She visited the hospitals, the orphanages, the care homes. She worked tirelessly with organizations like the National AIDS Trust and the London Lighthouse, dragging global attention onto people the world preferred to forget. And, most tellingly for our story, she brought William and Harry with her, to homeless shelters, to the hard edges of life beyond the palace walls, because she wanted her boys to grow into men who would spend their privilege on other people. That is the inheritance both brothers claim. That is the account everyone keeps trying to draw from. And that is why every documentary, every book, every interview that touches her name sets off a national argument. Because for millions of people, Diana is not content. She is conscience. Which brings us, at last, to Harry, and to the state of the family he left behind. Their exit from royal duty was followed by the memoir Spare, the protocol-shattering book that became the fastest-selling nonfiction title of all time upon its release in January of 2023. A book in which Harry left no stone in place, pouring out his fraught relationships with his father and his brother, and the firestorm his marriage brought into royal life, before he closed the door on it entirely. The Sussexes have returned to the United Kingdom only a handful of times since, and now, according to a new report, the royal family is open to peace talks with Prince Harry, but remains extremely reluctant to reconcile with Meghan Markle. Only weeks after Harry sent his aides to London to meet with King Charles's communications secretary, it emerged that the core of the rift has not moved an inch. And according to insiders, it comes down to a single word: trust. There is none. On Meghan's 44th birthday, of all days, a source spelled it out in the clearest terms yet. The royal family simply does not trust her. The monarch may be open to some kind of resolution with his son, but not, by these accounts, with his daughter-in-law. The same reporting suggests the future may see Harry traveling to and from the United Kingdom alone, without Meghan and without Archie and Lilibet, because the family's greatest fear, and I want you to let this land properly, is that any private conversation they have with her becomes raw material for the next money-making venture she throws herself into. They are not afraid of her anger. They are afraid of her content calendar. Meanwhile, King Charles has maintained a stoic silence across the 5,459 miles between him and his youngest son, even as Harry, to his credit, has reportedly offered to share his diary dates with the family, full transparency, an offer extended even to William and Catherine, the Prince and Princess of Wales, who have not spoken to the Sussexes in years. So let us tie off the threads in order, exactly as promised. But first, the ledger. Because when you line up the withdrawals from the Diana account in a single column, the pattern becomes impossible to unsee. The ring at the wedding reception, the first borrowing, received warmly. Then the butterfly earrings, the Cartier tank watch, the gold bracelets, each time to a guaranteed photograph. 2021, the Oprah interview, the panorama architecture rebuilt to the rafters, lighting, framing, victim, and institution. Then the Netflix documentary series, the hunted couple fleeing the machine that destroyed Diana, her tragedy converted into their origin story. And finally, 2026, the request for the vault itself, the diaries, the home movies, Althorp as a film set, and the halo formally fitted onto a new head. Watch the escalation. They began by borrowing her jewelry and ended by asking for her soul. Each withdrawal was bigger than the last. Each one was made without consulting the man who keeps the account. And the final one bounced. Of course it bounced. Thread 1. What was inside the pitch? A 30th anniversary Diana documentary for 2027 that asks for Althorp, the private archives, the handwritten diaries, and the unseen home movies. Engineered to crown Meghan Markle as the 21st century Diana, pitched at the exact moment the Spotify deal had died, American Riviera Orchard was stalling, and the $100 million Netflix arrangement was expiring. Thread 2. Why the gatekeeper said no. Because Charles Spencer reportedly carries the guilt of having introduced his sister to Martin Bashir, having watched her vulnerability turned into television through forged documents, and swore that no one, not a journalist, not a network, not a nephew, would ever harvest Diana's pain again. Thread 3. The letter. Far from siding with Harry, Diana's brother reportedly wrote to Prince William, urging the future king to break his silence and defend the crown, because in his eyes, Harry is no longer the threat. The unchecked story is. And so, the question I leave sitting on your table is the one this whole saga has been asking from the start. Is it ever acceptable to spend Diana's legacy as currency, even by her own son? Was Charles Spencer right to slam the vault shut? Tell me below because I read everything and I genuinely want to know where you land. But whatever you decide, carry this line out of here with you. Diana was exploited once by a man with forged documents, and her brother has decided she will not be exploited again by a man with a streaming deal. The vault at Althorp stays shut. The question is what a desperate Montecito does next, and whether Netflix walks away for good. The moment there is movement, you and I will be the first to talk about it. I am Royal Decode. Until next time.